Today let's talk about conducting client interviews, one of the most important sources of information in a strategy consulting project. As word goes around quickly in organizations, you should aim to provide an interview experience that's as smooth as possible, as this ensures buy-in not only from current, but also from future interviewees. For this, I propose this 6-step process that starts with requesting the interview, then preparing the interview, engaging, that is actually conducting the interview, bouncing, that is kind of a follow-up, using the information that you got in the interview, and eventually the actual follow-up with the interviewees. There are subtle differences whether you interview someone who is more senior or less senior, but I will touch on this along the way. The first step is requesting the interview, and here as a very first step you want to align the interview request within your project team to avoid multiple requests to the same person, and for this it's best practice to set up a central Excel tracker that tracks all the interview requests. Next is scheduling the interview. So here it makes a difference if it's a more formal or rather informal interview. If it's a rather informal interview with someone you already know from the organization or someone who's not that up high in the hierarchy, it's best to apply the walk, talk, write rule. So you should just walk over to the desk and ask for the interview. If they're not at the desk, just call them on the phone. And if you can't get them on the phone, just shoot them a message on Teams or an email. More senior stakeholders, like for example executives or heads of divisions, usually have a personal assistant, and it's best practice to call them to ask for the interview. Regardless of whom you're interviewing, you should always send out an interview information package that contains 4 to 6 slides on the project background, a selected deep dive for the interviewee, as well as your specific questions. This is also an opportunity to ask for any upfront reading materials that they got at hand, so you can prepare for the interview best. This then also brings us to the second step, prepare. So you should also research the intranet or any other sources like the SharePoint for other documents that might be relevant for the interview. So do your homework here and build 2 to 4 summary slides from these inputs. This is especially important if the inputs are in text form. So it's a low-hanging fruit for you to bring to the table to just visualize what's only in text so far on a slide in a framework. Next, let's organize support for conducting the actual interview. We will see in a second why this is important. 1.5 to 2 hours before the interview, you should send out the slides that you prepared as well as your list of questions to the project team, and this is important for 2 reasons. First of all, it gives your partners the feeling that you're really in charge of what you're doing and that they can rely on you. And second, it gives everyone the opportunity to add additional last-minute questions. Now, in case you're wondering why you shouldn't send this out earlier, well, of course you should send it out earlier if possible, but usually there's so much going on in a project that you're really lucky if you can manage to send it out something like 2 hours before. Next is step 3, engage. And here also let's get back to organizing support for conducting the interview from step 2. So there are multiple things that you need to do at the same time in the interview. You need to share your screen with, for example, the slides or at least a questionnaire. You need to lead the conversation, and sometimes there's not just one person that you're interviewing, but 2 or 3. So for example, I once interviewed the managing partner from a subsidiary, and he just happened to bring along a head of department who was more into the topic that you wanted to talk about. You need to take notes, and here especially it gets tricky when you share your screen, when you lead the conversation with multiple people and you need to take notes. And all of this at the same time, it's really a lot to do, so it's best to ask, for example, a junior or an intern to support you with taking the notes, for example, or with sharing the screen. Also, don't mistake an interview for a coffee chat. So I've seen this happening even with senior interviewers that I brought along something like 8 or 9 questions, but getting only 3 answered. And the reason for that was that they let the conversation just flow way too much. You need to control the conversation, and this is also really an evaluation criterion for more senior people, that they drive meetings towards results, and this is a prime example of this. You only get something like 30 or 45 minutes with those people that you interview, and you cannot schedule a follow-up interview just because you didn't get your questions answered. Now you could argue that actually at this point the interview is over, but that's not quite the case. As I said in the action title, we want to provide an interview experience that's as smooth as possible, so we need to go on with step 4, bounce. So after the interview, you should send out a thank you email to your interviewers that also includes the updated slides. And the reason for that is you want to make sure that you properly understood them. People need to feel understood. It's not good if you interview someone, take their information, maybe misinterpret it in some way, not intentionally, of course, and then that information ends up in some steer codec or any other place in the organization. A word of caution though, don't overbounce, and this especially applies to interviewing people whose unit is not going so well. So the idea of bouncing is not to end up with 5 new footnotes that explain why everything is not so bad after all. You're still there as a strategy consultant, and your job is to simplify complexity, to make things tangible and actionable, so make sure to strike the right balance here. Here it also makes a bit of a difference whom you're interviewing. So for example, executives get so much going on, they don't necessarily need you or want you to bounce the information afterwards with them. Now that you bounced with the interviewers, it's also important to bounce with the project team. And here you should send an email that contains any follow-up to-dos, that contains any decisions that you made during the interview, that contains updated hypothesis test results, which contains any other key insights that you came along. And of course also a link to the Teams follow where you can find the documentation of the interview, but also please attach the slides and the notes as PDF files. And you should go with PDF files here because they are easier to open on mobile phones. While not directly a bouncing task, you should also update the interview tracker now. This then brings us to the 5th step, use. So now it's actually time to use the information that you got in the interview, so in a steer codec or anything else. Make sure to collect feedback on the slides as usual, so that in step 6, follow up, you can now share with your interviewees how the slides were perceived, anything else that's relevant for them. And please don't underestimate the 6th step. So you could argue that we are actually done after step 3 or something, but it's not the case. You need to make sure that stakeholders within your project team and of course outside your project team, like for example the interviewees, are always feeling in the loop, and here make sure to follow up with them. Now, in case you're wondering how this is different for external interviews, well, the difference really is that external interviews are transactional in nature. You pay something like 800, 900 hours for someone to take a walk and share some information with you through the grapevine, and here it's much more about the relationship. So this is also why I emphasize a smooth interview experience and this end-to-end process. You will want to make people feel involved in the project and not just be providers of information. So that's it for today. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next video.